Okay, so the lab is, that's weird. So the computer will guess a random number, and you have to, or will pick a random number, you have to guess whether it's right or not. There are actually a lot of ways to implement this. However, I'm going to go over the way that I would implement it, and if you didn't do it this way, that's totally fine. And if you get the same result, then that's really how you can tell whether you did it correctly or not. So looking at the PowerPoint, really like the order of operations is pick a random number, then get the player guess, increase the number of tries, and tell the player if the guess is too high or too low. I'm just going to start with a random number part again. Like, I think this is the first thing that you should be starting with. And the first thing really is just, can I print out a random number between 1 to 100 at all? And by using rand like this, I could see that I'm getting random numbers. And if I want to just test it with more than just one case, I'm just going to wrap this whole thing in a true, just to test like an infinite number of them, and just verify that all my numbers are kind of between 1 to 100. I don't have any like errant like 100 ones or zeros or anything like that. I think I saw 100 in here. Yeah, there, right there. I see 100. Cool. Okay, so this while true is useful because it tells me that I can generate random numbers. So now that I have a random number, I actually want to store that in a variable because I need to compare against this inside my loop. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this while true for now. That was just for testing. And instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called random number. I'm going to assign it equal to this. I'm going to print this guy out instead. So without even worrying about loop, the next thing I want to do is I want to ask the player for a guess. Create a variable for their guess. And then once I have this guess, I can compare it against a random number. And if it's correct, I want to print out something. So if guess is equal to random number, remember you have to do double equals here to compare. You can say let's see if we can get it to print out this line here. Let's just test without guessing it. So the random number is 68. So I'm going to type in 67 and nothing happens, which is what I would expect. And I'm going to type in 88 here because I know that's what the guess is, and I get my if statement that prints it out. Okay? This is basically like all I really want to start with because I know that if I have this, I have a win condition for my game. So the next part is really like not even worrying about whether I'm too high or too low. Can I just repeat this whole thing over and over again until like I actually guess it? Can I do this over and over again, like ask for a guess and tell if it's correct, and see if I can, when I do guess it correctly, break out of my loop? So if I set up a while true here against this whole thing, I'm just going to repeat this whole thing again. I guess 17 or 187, nothing happens. To, I guess 18, I guessed it. And I'm stuck inside this loop now. I can't get out of this world of the guess my number game, crappiest game of the year. I'm going to stay in here. Remember that if you want to break out of a loop, you have to have the break statement here, right? This will break you out of the loop. So in the case where I guess correctly, I actually want to break out of the loop. So I'm building up my program kind of step by step. I'm seeing what's working and what's not. 7. And I exited. Cool. I have my win condition now. The next thing is I need to actually tell you whether you're too high or too low. I happen to know exactly what the number is, but that's not really going to be the case. So if my guess is equal to the random number, then I'm going to exit out by doing a break here. I can set up a couple of other conditions though. I can set up else if the guess is less than the random number. I can print out that, saying that your guess is too low. I'm going to just test this part now. I'm writing literally one if statement, and I'm going to test that. So I have 54. I'm going to do a higher one right now. Nothing happens. I'm going to do 53. It tells me my guess is too low. And then test 54, and I exit out of the loop. Okay? So I know I have the low case. Well, how do I do the high case now? Well, I could do this, right? I don't actually even need this. I could just delete that part, and that takes care of the high guess for me. Because if the first case is not true, which means the numbers aren't the same, and the second case is not true, which means the number is less than the random one, then the only other possibility that I can have is that it's greater than the random number. So I can just put a else here and say your guess is too high. Okay. This is essentially the game now. So I know that 51 is too high, 4 is too low, 28 is too high, and 10 will be correct. Now the last part is to print out the number of tries it took. And if I want to keep track of how many times it took me to guess, I actually know that already right here because every time I go through this loop, it counts as one try. So if I make a variable that stores the number of tries, and every time through the loop I add 1 to this, do that, or I just do tries plus plus, this increases the number of tries every time I go through the loop. And now this is actually adding it up. At the end, all I have to do is print this out. Like so. I just print out tries in the middle, and I get my result here. I'm actually going to hide the I'm going to hide the guess because this is not fair. And we're going to see how many guesses it can take me. Guaranteed less than 7. Guess is too high. I'm going to do 25. 37. What's between 37 and 47? 43? 40. 41? Has to be 42. So I took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guesses. And I see that it took me 7 guesses. If you play this game correctly, I think you only ever need 7 guesses. That's the max that you ever need for 100, for a number between 1 to 100. All right, questions on this implementation? Did anyone else do it differently that want me to go over it with them?
I did while I guess the selected number is not the secret number.
That's another way you could do this. Well, you could do this while this guess is not equal to the random number, like this. The only thing about this is you have to put this guess up here. You have to ask for it once, like so. And then you have to keep asking for it again inside the loop here. You have to put this twice. See how I have this cin here inside the loop, and I have it outside the loop? If you were to do it like this, I would recommend doing it as a do-while loop if you didn't already. So you can do this as a do. I'm just going to move this back. I have a do-while loop. The first thing I'm going to do is ask for your guess like this. Like so. And if you have it be a do-while loop like this, now you only have to ask for a guess once. And then you can assume, you can paste in at the end. This congratulations line now lives outside the loop because I know that if I ever exit this loop, it's because you guessed it correctly. There's no other way to break out of this loop other than guessing the number correctly, which is why when you get down to here, you can assume that you guessed it properly. I want to show one more way to do this. It's going to lead into the other part of the for loop discussion. So last week I talked about for loops and all the 3 different parts that you need inside a for loop, right? So when you're writing a for loop, I'm just going to do all this temporarily. So when you are writing a for loop, there are 3 parts: the initialization, the test expression, and the update expression. So I want to show you that you don't necessarily have to have all 3 of those defined. So here's my simple for loop. It counts up to 10, and that's it. This is like the simplest for loop that counts up to 10. What happens if I start leaving out pieces of this for loop? Well, you're allowed to do that. For instance, if I delete this, You're allowed to do that too. Watch what happens with my for loop. So this is my for loop to start. My for loop will print out the numbers 1 to 10 in a row, like so. Watch what happens when I get rid of the plus plus, though. What happens when you have an empty statement? So it's still going to run this line of code. This line of code is literally a blank space. Like literally there's nothing in here. It's still going to run it. That means it's not going to change the value of I. So what's going to happen is it's just going to print out zeros infinitely. Okay? Like so. So that's because I'm not adding 1 to I. You can do this for the the conditional expression too. This test expression you can get rid of. So watch, I have an empty space in between the semicolons. You don't even have to have a space there. You literally just have to have the semicolons there. What happens when I run this?
True.
So it'll be true by default, which means now I'm incrementing, but I never can exit out of my loop just by leaving that out. What happens if I get rid of both of these? It'll be infinitely looping, and I will be 0 forever. It's a lot like what happened when I deleted just this part here. Okay, so you're allowed to leave off these two. You can also leave off this one too. Now, what happens here is that I can't compile this anymore because it doesn't know what this variable is, but I can print out a word. Look, I have no initialization expression, no condition, no test expression, no update expression either. So now it just infinitely loops. Doing this is another way of doing, this is exactly the same as me doing while true. They're identical to one another. There's no real great reason to do this. There are sometimes cases where you do want to leave out some of these. For instance, if you want to control how often the loop runs outside of this expression, you want to do like a break in here, then you wouldn't put a condition inside here. You're saying that you would be manually controlling that. So, for instance, I can leave it like this. I can create a variable called I equals 0 outside the loop. Then what I can do is say, hey, I can recreate this for loop actually by hand. By leaving that thing empty, I can still make it do the same exact thing. I can say I++. If I is greater than or equal to 10, break. This is me rewriting the for loop in a really bad way to do exactly what the for loop does, but leaving this expression empty. So now my for loop still runs the same number of times as it did originally. However, I'm doing all the work by myself. So instead I can move this up to here, I can move this guy into here, and I can move this expression into here and reverse it. That's why a for loop is so useful, because you don't have to do all that stuff on separate lines. Okay, I just want to talk about that because you might see somewhere in code that you'll see these things be left empty, like this. That just means it's going to do whatever pieces are not empty. It's still going to run the code in there. It's just if it's empty, it just ignores it essentially. So if you ever see that in code, that's what it means. All right, questions on this? Okay.